Good morning. How's everybody doing? It's a Wednesday today, so middle of the week. Time to plot the rest of the week so we can end strong. Um, this week, I've been thinking about, some of my experiences as a Jehovah's Witness and then leaving as well. And I saw a lot of comments on my video about leaving, and it just brought me back to some of the experiences I've had, and I was just thinking about how being a Jehovah's Witness, you are trained not to trust your own decisions, right? You need to have a Bible trained conscience. Um, you know, the decisions that you make about your own life, you have to apply obedience because obedience is better than sacrifice. All of these things, they train us to not trust our own decisions, to outsource that inner voice in your head. So simple decisions like what level of education you decide to achieve for yourself, what job you're going to have. I remember in the 90s as a preteen, there were a series of talks that were had about what job you have and how to think about the job you're going to have. And, they were talking about at the time, I think it was tobacco. There were some witnesses who worked for British America Tobacco at the time in Zimbabwe. And, it was a big contentious issue to say, well, if you're working for a tobacco company, how does that work? But those talks were talking about other places of work in general. You have to think about it and use your Bible trained conscience, and understanding that obedience is better than sacrifice. So it's like what level of education I have, there was a lot of pressure for me to say, don't go to university, just find something locally. I remember there was a witness who was older, and he had a very popular column on the newspaper, the national newspaper, like the Herald. And his material that he did, and that I'm going to be vague about it, but his material that he did was very, very popular in the country. And, he was doing well for himself. He was, a struggling journalist, and he'd stumbled upon this very creative mind. I mean, his work, um, most non-J dubs will remember this, in Zimbabwe at least from that time. If I say the name, they'll know who it was. And I remember watching this guy when we moved to the congregation where he was at. Meeting him, great guy, and then finding out, oh, he's the guy who does that, right? And but he slowly started moving away from it because his Bible trained conscience was telling him not to do that. Are you seeking fame? Are you seeking, And he just questioned your thought process, your ability to think independently, your ability to trust your own decisions. And this is not just with Jehovah's Witnesses, from my experience having left. You see this with any high control religion. So, Mormons, in Africa, we have some churches where the leader of that church is basically trying to create a cult, right? In the way they go about how they do things. There are other churches, well-known churches throughout South Africa, that are very high control. So you'll see the people in that church, when you talk to them and you try to do certain things, they say, oh, I have to speak to my brothers in the congregation. I mean, I have clients today that will first say, I need to check with somebody at church before we make this decision about my business. I will give them professional advice based on the data of their business, but they have to go check first what their um, fellowship says, So there's a lot of high control religions, or a lot of religions that have high control aspects to it. So it's this is my lived experience, what unfolded before my eyes, but it happens to a lot of people. And, internally, that inner voice, I remember the struggle for me, in primary school, being told, you're not going to be a prefect, where everybody thought I was going to be a prefect. I think I got up to a place where they were saying you're going to be the vice head boy, deputy head boy, um, or something like that. And my dad stepped in and said, "No, think about it." And you get all the scriptures about why it's a bad thing to do that, etc., etc. And and this is ongoing. This was ongoing, and at every turn, if you think the wrong thought, you could be making a mistake. You almost need permission to think. You need permission to make a decision about your life, who you're going to marry, who you're going to date, where you go out to have fun. And the challenging thing is you need to make mistakes to learn and grow in your decision making, right? You need to, especially in your teens, make the mistakes so you can become a fully formed adult. When many former Jehovah's Witnesses are now out there in the world, like myself, the first phase, it seems like you're indecisive, but it's because you haven't built the muscle of trusting your own decisions. I mean, I remember when I first left my job to start my business, um, it was such a heavy decision. It was so difficult to make, and it became an emotionally charged decision, And I went back and forth and back and forth, and literally I wasted about a year to 18 months just going back and forth, unable to make a decision, and I kind of stuck in it to the point where eventually when I left, I just had to leave now, you know. And when I was first getting my first batch of clients, I outsourced a lot of trusts to them where they were working with me because they trusted me, right? So I was able to grow out of that, but it took intentional effort to grow the muscle of, number one, just making a decision and trusting that whether it's the right decision or the wrong decision, I'm going to learn from it, right? And I'm going to grow from it. Number two, trusting that I have the tools within me to make a decision. You know, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you have so much pressure from your friends, your family, the congregation. If you are seen somewhere doing something, that can become a rumor mill that spreads around you. And now you have to answer to the elders. They pull you into the B school and you get counseling, or they just ask you, well, we heard this about you, and so now everywhere you are, you're always thinking, second guessing yourself, looking behind your shoulder. And it's not healthy. As you get older and as you mature, you start to realize independence is not rebellion. you know I remember when I first started speaking out to say I don't want to go to the meetings. I think I was in my early 20s, and my dad would try to force me. I remember something as simple as growing my hair. I used to have fights with my dad at like 22 years old, right, about growing my hair. I decided I want to grow my hair, and I'd always keep it neat, and I wanted to have dreadlocks long term. But at the time, I was just growing my hair. I grew my hair. And when I eventually wanted to do dreadlocks, that's when I realized I'm balding. So I lost the good years of my hair fighting with my dad about don't grow your hair and stuff like that. So, but it felt like rebellion. Just being independent and making independent decisions felt like I'm rebelling against dad. I'm rebelling against the religion. I'm rebelling against the community that I love so much, the people that I love so much. People look at you with disapproving looks, comments, things like that. There's a lot of pressure you get. I think my experience was not as bad as some people that I know of, and but it was still something that I had to overcome, and this whole rebellious thing was so bad, so entrenched in me. Every decision I had to make, I had to basically rebel. In my mind, I had to rebel. And it got to a point where I just had a negative relationship with authority or anything that would potentially go against what I'm thinking or what I want, right? And I remember the early days of my dating my wife. I don't know how she stuck around for. I don't know how she stuck around, but if she said something or did something that was against what it was an immediate We went from, hey, we're in love, to, oh, you did that, it's over. You're cut off. There were these patterns in my behavior that was just wild. That's the best way to put it. It was just wild. And it took years, and she exercised grace because she could see that there was something good in me, and she hung around, and she grew up in a healthy religious background with a healthy community where you could have your own thoughts. So she just allowed me to have my own thoughts, and that's what kept us together until I sort of started seeing my own patterns and saying, I didn't need to overreact there. I didn't need to overreact in that situation. And seeing how my overreaction lost me clients, lost me friends, lost me people that I loved, because I was overreacting. I was overreacting because every decision felt like, oh, I have to rebel, I have to push against it, I have to, and that was the muscle that I had. And now you have to retrain a new muscle of independent thought. You can have a different opinion, you can have a different thought, and it's okay. Nobody's gonna die, nobody's gonna be punished, nobody's going to hell, right? Nobody's going to Gehenna or whatever it is for your religion. But it's such a big thing within our community that you see it in different ways, and rebuilding relationships, rebuilding your life after Jehovah's Witness is tough. I have a Jehovah's Witness friend now who, he's an elder now, and he the phrase he keeps repeating is, obedience is better than sacrifice. And when we have these conversations about love, he'll say, no, obedience is love. That's how ingrained this training is, you know. And I mean, things as simple as what to wear, you know, uh, decisions of what you have in your house, who you hang around with, they're controlled. You have to first think about what other people are going to think about first. You have to think about how you're going to justify this decision um, in your religion, at church, at the Kingdom Hall, you know, before you boldly make that decision. And moving away from obedience as an independent person, it's not about obedience, right? It's really about making a healthy decision that works for you and the people that you're going to impact. And it's a journey. It's a journey for Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, and it's a journey to rebuild that muscle. So to the outside world or to other people, it might look like you're indecisive. It might look like you are argumentative. It might look like you are, um, you know, you don't trust yourself. But it's just some of the tools that people learned at an earlier age. You become an adult, but you don't have the emotional maturity of an adult. You don't have a healthy sense of independence to be able to think your own thoughts, to be able to make your own decisions and do what you think is best, and trust that any mistakes you make are part of your growth journey, and it's not a life and death decision every single time. Every little thing is a life and death decision. And for somebody who's not a Jehovah's Witness, it's a bit difficult to explain or for them to understand. And I remember my wife was struggling with this a lot when I was going through my deconstruction, and, telling her how a simple decision like, I wanted to play rugby. And for me to play rugby, we needed to be in camp. Camp was basically going to school, and for about a week, you're just in school training. And, I couldn't do that because my dad would disapprove. And, how does that become a life and death decision? Well, if I went against my dad, right, and it became an issue that was spiritual, right, disobeying your parents, competition and the like, and you're showing no remorse, you could get disfellowshipped. If you get disfellowshipped, the threat at the time was, I will then be kicked out of the house, right? At least for me, that was my lived experience. I felt like if I kept pushing this line, I will get disfellowshipped and I'll get kicked out of the house. And once I'm kicked out of the house, I'm on the street, right? And for me, it wasn't just kicked out of the house. All my relatives are Jehovah's Witnesses, so it's not like I could just go to that relative over there. I'm pretty sure now, looking back, there probably were people I could have turned to, But at the time, it felt like, because both on my mom's side and my dad's side, all strong Jehovah's Witnesses, right? Now some have left and all that, but at the time, strong Jehovah's Witnesses on both sides. So you could lose your entire family for playing rugby. And every decision kind of came down to that. And I didn't realize that until, within my once I was married and I overreacted to something. And I really sat down and said, why did I overreact to that? And I realized my deepest fear was that if this thing happened, or if I did this, or if my wife did this, she'll end up not loving me. And to me, that meant, oh, it's over. And I always needed this reassurance that she does love me, and um, that's why I'm like, I don't know how she stuck around. I guess she gets the benefit now of a much more mature person and that kind of thing. But, every decision almost becomes life and death, especially when you're cooked in it from childhood. I started reading Bible reading on stage at 5 years old, right? And so I was heavy in it. I was preaching. I was doing a lot of things. There were times where I was basically a ministerial servant at a very young age. And I'm sure you know people like that. And now we're paying for those sins, right? We're paying for those sins. But yeah, now I'm trying to have like a positive outlook on it, to say that's part of my formation, part of my story, part of my life, to make me who I am. And everything is for your benefit, right? If you choose to learn from it, even the difficult things. But yeah, I just thought I'd share a little bit about that and some of the smaller aspects of my journey, rather than the theology of it, just some of the things you go through as a Jehovah's Witness, and then you have to unlearn and relearn once you leave. I have family who've left Jehovah's Witnesses but joined another church, and I can see those patterns repeating themselves, even in the new church, right? It's almost like you need permission. It's almost like you can't think for yourself. You know, I, I'm. I remember when I had a certain conversation with my dad. I knew after that conversation that this was it. That was the end of our relationship, and I feared that moment so much prior. So I hesitated, capitulated. You would lie that, oh, yes, I'm going to the meetings. Oh, yes, I'm going to the memorial, but I have this problem. But deep down, no, this is not for you, right? And it took me years but when I got to that point, I was okay with it, because now I had the muscle of understanding, as an independent person, this is what works for me. And as an independent person, that's what works for my dad. And it's okay. And as much as he may distance himself from me, it's his journey that he's struggling with. And as an independent person, I can't imagine what it's like to feel compelled to have to not talk to your son, right? I couldn't imagine that for myself, right? But the fear I had of getting to that point, the only way I was able to survive that point was because I left, and I left for years. So it's in the end, it all works out. Um, but like I said, I think I've had it not as bad as other people, and it might be that some people have it way worse. I know of people who've been in abusive families, Jehovah's Witness families. On the outside, it's all rosy. On the inside, it's physical abuse and that kind of thing. And I was lucky that my parents, as much as there was a cognitive dissonance around Jehovah's Witnesses and faith, I never doubted that my parents loved me. Even now, with my dad distancing himself from me, it's been a good year or so. I still know that he loves me. So I was very, very fortunate. Some people, don't know it, internally. I knew my parents loved me. The last time my parents put their hands on me, I was like grade 3, and my dad wasn't. Even when he disciplined us, it wasn't. you knew you were getting a spanking. You weren't. It wasn't a terrorizing act. You know what I mean? He was very gentle with us, to be honest, and we were boys. I almost think, and I'll contradict myself. I almost think sometimes I preferred to get the belt than what ensued after grade three. After grade three, whenever there was something you did, you got a lecture, and I'm talking 4 or 5 hours. I remember there was this specific week in my late teens where my dad was trying to, and he would start opening the Bible, and for like 3, 4 days maybe, I would sleep at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., having spoken to my dad since 8, 9 p.m. Just opening the scriptures and just, he had the big Bible, big old Bible. I don't know if it's still there, but it was a big, you know, very, because I was used to the smaller ones. He had the big Bible. He's had it for years. And it would be just like hours and hours. It was actually torture because he would be sitting down and he'd be like, oh, no, no, just stand over there. Oh, it's clucking to me now. That was part of the punishment. You stand, I sit, and we're gonna go for hours. Slow torture. But anyways, yeah. I think I was very lucky that my parents. I knew they loved me. I just wasn't sure if they were gonna be able to what decisions they would make if there was a conflict between what I wanted and what Jehovah's Witnesses recommended. Um, So I was very lucky in that regard. But anyways, let's end it there. I hope you guys have a great week. And if you're in your journey, just remember, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and it takes time, and any mistakes are not fatal, and you may struggle to make friendships, make relationships. It does take time, but eventually you will. Um, just keep working at it. Rome wasn't built in a day, so unlearning the thing, you need to unlearn enough things to get to a point where, you can start seeing things differently. It's not easy, but millions of people are doing it, and they're surviving. And, anyways, let's end it there. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.